The afternoon sun blazed over the endless Wyoming prairie, turning the tall grass into waves of gold as Jacob Carter guided his horse toward Silver Creek Ranch after a long morning repairing broken fences. At 45, Jacob was known throughout the county as one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory, yet people admired him less for his land than for his quiet kindness. Years earlier he had buried his wife after a terrible fever, and since then the great ranch had become a lonely place. Hundreds of cattle grazed peacefully, horses filled the corrals, and dozens of ranch hands worked from sunrise until sunset. But when evening came, the large ranch house echoed with silence. Jacob carried that silence like a second shadow. He had learned that wealth could buy almost everything except someone to share supper with. As he rode through the front gate, he noticed movement near the kitchen porch. An elderly cook named Martha was scraping leftover food into a bucket for the ranch dogs. Beside the porch stood a thin young woman wearing a faded brown prairie dress patched so many times that almost none of the original fabric remained. Dust covered her worn boots, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small cloth bag that looked almost empty. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but her eyes still carried quiet dignity. Jacob slowed his horse without speaking. The woman hesitated before finding the courage to ask softly, "Ma'am, could I have the scraps?" Martha looked surprised. "The scraps? Anything will do," the young woman whispered. "Even the bread that's too hard to eat." Jacob heard every word. He watched as Martha glanced toward the bucket meant for the dogs, unsure what to do. The woman quickly lowered her eyes. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," she admitted. "I don't want charity. I'll work for whatever you can spare." Those simple words struck Jacob harder than any storm. His own mother had once taught him that a person's true character was revealed by how they treated someone who could offer nothing in return. Jacob dismounted immediately. The woman stepped back nervously, afraid she had angered the ranch owner. Instead, Jacob removed his hat politely. "My name is Jacob Carter," he said gently. She looked up with uncertainty. "My name is Grace Miller." Jacob noticed how tired she looked. Her cheeks were hollow. Her hands shook from hunger, yet she stood with quiet pride instead of begging. "What happened to you?" he asked. Grace hesitated. "My father passed away last winter. My mother followed him in the spring. The bank took our farm. I've walked for nearly 2 weeks looking for work. I've been turned away everywhere. I thought maybe someone would have scraps." The words came quietly, but each one carried the weight of unbearable hardship. Jacob remained silent for a moment. Then he smiled kindly. "You asked for scraps." Grace nodded. Jacob looked toward Martha. Martha. "Yes, Mr. Carter. Set the dining room table." She blinked. "For dinner?" "No, for a feast." Grace stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand." Jacob smiled warmly. "No one who comes to Silver Creek Ranch asking for scraps leaves hungry." Within minutes, the enormous dining table inside the ranch house filled with roasted beef, fresh vegetables, warm biscuits, creamy mashed potatoes, homemade gravy, baked beans, apple pie, butter, preserves, and fresh milk. Grace stopped at the doorway. She could hardly believe such a table was meant for her. "I can't." Jacob gently pulled out a chair. "You asked for scraps. Instead, I'd be honored if you'd share supper with me." Tears immediately filled Grace's eyes. No one had spoken to her with such kindness in months. She sat slowly, almost afraid everything would disappear if she blinked. Jacob bowed his head. "Would you pray with me?" She nodded. Together they thanked God for the meal. When Grace finally picked up her fork, she ate slowly at first, trying to hide how hungry she truly was. Jacob noticed. "Eat as much as you like," he said. "There will always be enough." For the first time in many months, Grace smiled. It was small, gentle, but genuine. Neither of them realized that the simple meal would change both of their lives forever. As the evening settled over Silver Creek Ranch, two lonely souls who had expected nothing from each other began the first chapter of an unforgettable journey, one built not on wealth, but on compassion, second chances, and hope. Jacob Miller never forgot the look in Hannah's eyes when he placed that hot meal before her. It wasn't just hunger he had seen. It was disbelief, as though kindness was something she had stopped expecting from the world. The following morning, before sunrise, Hannah quietly swept the ranch porch without being asked. She cleaned the kitchen, fed the chickens, and repaired a torn blanket she had found in the washroom. Jacob noticed every small act but said nothing. He simply watched. Days turned into weeks. The lonely ranch that had echoed with silence for years slowly came alive again. Fresh bread cooled on the kitchen windowsill every morning. The old rocking chair on the porch was repaired. Wildflowers appeared in old glass jars around the house. Even Jacob's aging sheepdog began following Hannah everywhere, as though he knew she belonged. For the first time since losing his parents years earlier, Jacob no longer hurried through supper alone. Someone sat across the table, asking how the day's work had gone. One afternoon, while repairing fences together beneath a bright blue Wyoming sky, Hannah finally told him the truth. My husband died during a harsh winter. After that, the bank took everything. I searched for work in every town. Some people offered scraps. Others chased me away before I could even ask. Jacob tightened the fence wire but never stopped listening. I almost gave up. She whispered, "The day I met you, I hadn't eaten properly in 3 days." Jacob looked toward the endless prairie. No one should ever have to beg for food. Hannah smiled softly. "You didn't just feed me. You reminded me I was still human." Those words stayed with Jacob long after sunset. Meanwhile, someone else had been watching the growing friendship. Victor Kane, the wealthiest ranch owner in the county. Cold-hearted, greedy, a man who believed every acre around Silver Creek Ranch should belong to him. Victor had tried buying Jacob's land for years. Jacob had always refused. Now Victor saw another opportunity. He rode onto the ranch with several armed riders, stopping beside the front gate. "I hear you've invited strangers to live here," Victor sneered. Jacob calmly stepped onto the porch. "She's my guest." Victor laughed. "A homeless woman? People like her bring trouble." Before Jacob could answer, Hannah walked outside. "I'll leave if my presence causes problems." Jacob immediately shook his head. "No." His voice was calm but firm. "This is your home too." Victor's smile disappeared. "You'll regret that." The riders turned their horses and disappeared into the prairie. That night strange things began happening. Several cattle vanished. Fence posts were broken. Water barrels were overturned. Someone even tried setting fire to an empty hay shed before ranch hands extinguished the flames. Everyone suspected Victor, but no one could prove it. Jacob refused to be intimidated. "We rebuild tomorrow." At sunrise, the entire ranch went to work. Hannah organized supplies. She divided workers into teams. Older ranch hands were amazed. Within hours, broken fences stood again. Livestock returned safely. The ranch looked stronger than before. One elderly ranch hand smiled. "Miss Hannah runs this place better than most foremen." Jacob laughed. "I was thinking the same thing." As winter melted into spring, Silver Creek Ranch became one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming. Travelers stopped simply to admire the healthy horses and beautiful fields. Children laughed outside the barn. Neighbors gathered for community dinners. The ranch had become more than land. It had become hope. But Victor Kane refused to accept defeat. Late one afternoon, Jacob received an official legal notice. Victor claimed ownership of part of Silver Creek Ranch. The hearing would take place in the county courthouse. If Jacob lost, everything would be gone. That evening, silence filled the porch. Jacob stared across the prairie. "I've spent 20 years building this ranch." Hannah gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You won't fight alone." Jacob looked at her. For the first time in years, he believed her. Together they searched through dusty trunks, old letters, forgotten maps, and faded land records. Night after night they refused to quit. Finally, hidden inside an old wooden chest beneath Jacob's father's journal, Hannah discovered something extraordinary. The original land deed, signed decades earlier. The very document that could destroy Victor Kane's lies forever. Holding the fragile paper with trembling hands, Hannah looked at Jacob and smiled. "We're going to save your home." Jacob couldn't hide the hope in his eyes. For the first time since Victor's threats began, victory finally seemed possible. The morning of the courthouse hearing arrived beneath a brilliant blue Wyoming sky. Sunlight stretched across the prairie as Jacob Miller saddled his horse in silence. For years he had fought droughts, blizzards, cattle rustlers, and loneliness. But this battle felt different. If Victor Kane succeeded, Silver Creek Ranch, the land his father had built with his own hands, would belong to a man who cared only about money. Hannah stepped out of the ranch house carrying the original land deed she had discovered hidden inside the old cedar chest. She carefully wrapped the fragile papers in a leather folder before handing them to Jacob. "We have the truth," she said softly. Jacob smiled. "And today the truth will finally be heard." The county courthouse overflowed with ranchers, townspeople, and neighbors who had come to support Jacob. Everyone knew Victor Kane's reputation. Many had suffered because of his greed, but few had ever dared challenge him. Victor entered confidently with 2 expensive lawyers. "You still have time to surrender," he sneered. Jacob calmly replied, "I'd rather lose everything honestly than steal 1 acre dishonestly." The courtroom fell silent. The judge carefully examined Victor's documents first. At a glance they appeared official, complete with signatures and seals. Then Hannah stepped forward. "Your Honor," she said respectfully, "these are the original land records." The judge adjusted his spectacles and compared every page carefully. Minutes passed. The courtroom became so quiet that no one dared breathe. Finally, the judge looked directly at Victor Kane. "These documents presented by Mr. Kane have been altered." Gasps filled the room. He continued, "The original deed clearly proves Silver Creek Ranch legally belongs to Mr. Jacob Miller." Victor's face turned pale. The judge struck his gavel. "Case dismissed." Then he looked toward the sheriff. "Arrest Victor Kane for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of property." The sheriff immediately placed iron handcuffs on Victor. As he was led away, the townspeople quietly applauded. Justice had finally won. Outside the courthouse, neighbors surrounded Jacob and Hannah with smiles, handshakes, and congratulations. Old Mrs. Wilson hugged Hannah tightly. "My dear, if you hadn't found those papers, we'd have lost one of the finest men in Wyoming." Jacob looked at Hannah with grateful eyes. "No," he answered, "I would have lost far more than land." That evening, Silver Creek Ranch hosted the largest community supper anyone could remember. Long wooden tables stretched across the ranch yard beneath strings of lanterns. Fresh bread, roasted beef, vegetables, pies, biscuits, beans, and homemade desserts filled every table. Children laughed while ranch hands played guitars and fiddles. No one left hungry. As the celebration continued, Jacob quietly stood and tapped his glass. Everyone turned toward him. "I want to tell you a story." The crowd became silent. "Several months ago, a hungry woman walked onto this ranch. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for land. She only asked ... Could I have the scraps?" Many guests looked toward Hannah. Jacob smiled warmly. "I could have given her leftovers. I could have sent her away. But something told me that day ... If a person has enough courage to ask for scraps ... they deserve a seat at the table." The crowd nodded quietly. Jacob continued, "What I didn't know ... was that she wasn't the one being rescued." He turned toward Hannah. "She rescued me." The crowd smiled. Jacob walked across the yard until he stood beside her. When Hannah arrived ... This ranch had cattle. It had horses. It had land. But it wasn't a home. He gently took her hands. "You filled every empty room with kindness. You reminded every worker what compassion looks like. You taught me that generosity never makes a man poorer. It makes him richer." Tears filled Hannah's eyes. Jacob slowly reached into his pocket. He removed a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold ring. The ranch yard fell completely silent. "Hannah ... You asked for scraps, but you've given me a future. You've given this ranch laughter. You've given me hope. And you've given me a reason to come home every evening." He knelt on one knee. "Will you marry me?" Hannah could no longer hold back her tears. She smiled through them. "Yes, with all my heart." The ranch erupted into applause. Cowboys removed their hats. Children cheered. Even old Martha wiped away happy tears. A month later, beneath the bright summer sun, the little white church overlooking the prairie welcomed family, neighbors, and friends from every nearby town. Hannah walked down the aisle wearing a beautiful white frontier wedding dress. Jacob waited with tears in his own eyes. When they exchanged vows, neither of them thought about the hardships behind them. They thought only about the life ahead. Years passed. Silver Creek Ranch became known across Wyoming for one simple reason. No hungry traveler was ever turned away. A wooden sign stood beside the front gate. It read, "If you're hungry, come in." Many people asked Jacob why he had built such a welcoming place. He always smiled before answering, "Because one day someone asked me for scraps, and God gave me a family instead." The end. If this heartfelt Old West story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable cowboy stories, filled with faith, hope, love, second chances, and inspiring frontier adventures. Your support helps bring many more powerful Western stories to life.